for Claire to join me. We're going to be talking about touring today, how to keep healthy on tour. Here we go. So, hi.
Bonjour, how are you?
I'm all right. I'm in my house today for once, so my phone is being propped up rather precariously on my
Yeah,
keyboard,
so
but we'll
mine's
see
all
how it
kind
goes.
of wobble. If I suddenly tilt, it's because mine's fallen over. Or maybe
That's
I've
fine.
fallen over.
Oh, maybe. How are you?
I'm good.
Good, good. Well, we've been doing lots of exciting things this week.
We have.
Um, Teaching government bodies how to look after themselves during times of stress. And a lot of it is very relevant anyway, just to how people are trying to integrate back into the world now that things are opening up again.
Well, yeah, I mean,
So,
I actually wanted to talk a little bit about that. I had put it on my list of things at the bottom, but
mm,
obviously, the consequence of COVID, well, there's many, but, where at the beginning of the lockdown, I was working primarily with the songwriter producers
yeah,
who could no longer work in their sort of team communities of putting music together and were having to work alone, which was really hard at first.
mm,
And then learning how to use Zoom so they could do sort of remote sessions. But now I have the opposite problem where everyone's now starting to go back into live. And I've had a few that it's almost as if they have agoraphobia. I can't face it.
yeah,
And we did have this with the government chat we gave this week of I'm not sure I'm ready to go back and integrate into the world, which, for musicians, for normal people, us normal folk who might be in an office of 20 people, imagine performing in front of tens of thousands of people. It's kind of startling. So that for me
yeah.
is, I've been busy, starting to prepare people mostly for tours for next year. But, it's really good that managers are starting to address this because it's
Mm.
a serious issue. Um, so that's
Yeah, there's
interesting.
there's yeah, there's I think it's not just about the kind of agoraphobia, it's the fear of getting sick and the insurance consequences and all of that. And just, I mean, I get that. I'm even like in my job, I'm still being quite cautious. I don't think that I'm going to remove the mask requirement in my clinic. And I do ask people to lateral flow test before they come for their appointments if they're in person. That's just the way I prefer to do things because I work with high risk people. But I think we're seeing the number of people who are not doing well, and they're not the typical demographic that you would expect to kind of be responding badly to this current pandemic. Um, so it's not. I think we do place a lot of focus on mental health, but at the same time, I think that
Yeah,
the physical element is really important, and
yeah.
I
I
really
mean, I
want
think
to.
your point about the immune system kind of is really important to start thinking about.
Yeah,
What,
because
what
ultimately, like the lifestyles people have led, you can kind of get away with a lot in your 20s around like late nights, not sleeping, but it does ultimately have an impact on the body.
yeah.
So the fixes for that hyperbaric oxygen, that's my go-to for everything these days. It's like it really helps the jet lag, helps with like sleep deprivation.
And how would not everyone knows where you are, but how, for people that are in other parts of the world, how would they even go about finding somewhere that offers that service?
I mean, I think most big cities in America will have places, certainly places by the sea. I've got patients who will literally go to Israel or Cyprus because there's loads of places to do it there, just if they've got like specific chronic illnesses. But generally, like, in LA, there's loads of places that have hyperbaric. And if you look in London, you'll find places too. I think in the US, you really want to see if someone's a member of the IHA, International Hyperbarics Association, because you know that they'll probably be using good quality machines and they'll be trained and they know what they're doing. So there's loads of people doing it, and you can also get your own chamber. And this is one of the things we've been talking about with our wellness riders is actually the benefits of having certain equipment on a tour that are not just going to benefit the artist but the whole team.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. So just talking specifically about hyperbaric, you know, I've seen the impact it has on anxiety, migraines, um, really poor sleep. Like if you're really like overloaded. I've had a few weeks of very hard deadlines, and yesterday morning I was so exhausted, and I just was like, okay, I'm going to go in my hyperbaric for 30 minutes, close my eyes, and I felt great. I was able to like carry on and plow through till late into the evening. Not ideal, but these are the kinds of things you have to do when you have very specific deadlines, and then you can just, it's the same as anything. You're going to have periods of high intensity stress, and then you can relax a bit. But it's during that relax stage that you're more vulnerable to getting sick, and that's basically what I want to try and avoid people experiencing. So, good for tissue repair, good for stress, good for anxiety, good for immune support. So
And
that's
what is
one
it
of
actually doing? It's putting more oxygen back into your blood, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so basically, when you're going into a hyperbaric, you're kind of at a depth, so you're going to be increasing the oxygen concentration. If you then have an oxygen concentrator, which is a separate machine, you're putting, almost like pure oxygen through a nasal cannula or a mask. So you don't have to do that, but it does expedite the process and it makes it much more effective. So basically what you're doing is you have oxygen that's carried on your hemoglobin and your red blood cells, and you have oxygen in your bloodstream. So you're saturating the hemoglobin. So ultimately, if your red blood cells are oxygenated properly, they work more effectively. And it's basically one thing I've noticed is that, for example, in my family, we have thalassemia trait, which means that you don't carry your iron very well on your red blood cells. And it's always like,
Right.
I'm always irritatingly on the cusp of anemia. And
Right.
since I've been doing this regularly, I have not had any issues. My bloods have been pretty good. So it has, and also my white blood cells are much better. So I see the difference in my own personal, like, data, as well as kind of looking at benchmark kind of parameters that you can measure, like in terms of like symptoms. But when I see it, specific things happening with me, and I like to geek and test on myself, it's quite profound. And those machines aren't that expensive. I use a company called Oxy Health. I'm not like a general plugger, but I do love that brand, and I love the fact that they use all these like really non-toxic materials. The machines are well made, and I think those of us who are trained in it have seen what a significant, like, powerful tool it is. And yes, it is a bit of a pain to have something like that in your office or your house, but they are soft and they do collapse, so you can actually go around the world with one. I've got a patient who's like lived in 3 countries in the last 3 months, and he's basically taken his hyperbaric everywhere he's gone. So you can do it.
Okay.
That's
Well,
one thing.
so I mean, obviously, we're doing quite a lot of work around touring, recording artists, performing
Hmm.
artists, and when they go out on tour. And I think it's just, I don't know whether it is interesting, but I find it fascinating. So do you. So we can just geek out together. Um, the things that sort of keep coming up are the kind of, travel, time differences,
Yeah.
sleep deprivation, and obviously I work on the more behavioral psychology side with the coaching, but I find it every time you start to explain to me, oh, this is why this is happening, it's just, I think it's really interesting information for people. So on that, what happens to your body when you're going through different time zones?
I think the main thing is that if you're not getting the right light exposure at the right times, you're basically messing up your circadian rhythm, and that's just going to send your cortisol at like haywire. That has a significant impact on your immune system. It's also, you know, I don't want to get all gloomy here, but it's a massive driver for cancer, like circadian disruption. So one of the reasons I'm like really, yeah, you know, I give people loads of advice around jet lag and like avoiding jet lag. Not that jet lag is the issue itself, it's actually the light exposure disruption. You know, and it's the same with nighttime. You know, we're all working hours that we're not kind of meant to evolutionarily be working
Hmm.
because we're supposed to like kind of wind down when the day starts to kind of, you know, when the light starts to soften and you know the sun goes down, but we're working odd hours. You know, we've got people working night shifts, and God bless those people on the NHS, because if it wasn't for them,
Yeah.
this country would have fallen apart. But at the same time, you know, it's really important to make sure that if you are doing any sort of shift work, that you are kind of respecting as much as you can the kind of light exposures. So, like, and this is an example of kind of traveling on a plane. I use an app actually. What's it called? I can't remember the name. I can put a note in the chat because I haven't used it for a year and a half because I haven't been
No.
on a long. No, I haven't used it since last March because I haven't been on a long haul flight.
Yeah.
Um, so next week. um, so I'll put the name of the app, but what it does is you plug in the times of your flights and the days of your flights, and it basically tells you when you should like try and nap, when's a good time to have caffeine, when you want to think about taking melatonin, and like when you need to be seeing light. And it's one of my biggest issues with planes is that they don't follow the rules of circadian rhythm and like getting adapted to the new time zone.
Yeah.
You know, on the way from here to LA, like you know, they close the shutters. Everyone goes mental when I open the shutters. And I'm like,
Yeah.
look, I'm trying to habituate myself to the light. I won't eat at certain times.
Yeah, no,
You
I
know,
have exactly, I'm on medication and trying to work out, you know, adapting because my body, I have to take them at specific times of the day. And it's like,
yeah,
hang on, I can't work this out. It's really hard.
yeah. So it's really like the best thing you can do. I mean, phones are really annoying now, and watches are annoying because you can't really set them unless they're manual. And I mean,
Yeah,
like, I
that's
don't even
right.
know how to. So you can't put it on the time of where you're going. What I do is I always just have like the clock of the place I'm going. And I try and like in the weeks running up to wherever I'm going, if it's going to be like one of those weird few weeks where I'm long hauling to 2 or 3 places in a month and it's not so easy, I'll just kind of tend to stay on that time zone a bit more. But you know, in the weeks before I go to the US, for example, I will be kind of getting later and later in my bedtime. I'll be shifting my clinic in the morning later and I'll be finishing later so that I'm kind of getting on US time zones. And then by the time I get there, it's not a hard shift at all. And then of course avoiding food at the times where technically on the new time zone you should be sleeping.
Yeah.
So, you know, getting on the plane and basically not eating anything until just before you land.
Well, this,
And
I mean,
then,
this is hard and difficult for artists, you know, that are on and off planes and doing
yeah,
time shows. They're all over the place. And, you know, I've spoken to lots of tour managers and lots of agents, and it's, you know, from an economic point of view, they have to ram in as many shows as
of
possible to
course.
make sure economically it's making sense, but they're darting back and forth through time zones.
Yeah,
And
sometimes I think that someone needs to be more aware of this when they're planning and maybe think about how they can maximize the kind of performance potential as well by keeping people within a time zone for a specific period of time. Not
yeah,
everyone, I mean, all following some of the hacks that I'm doing or that we're teaching people when we talk about touring. Because, like, you know, I've done a lot of testing on myself to see the detrimental impact of some of my crazy flight patterns, and they've been fine. I was actually really amazed by my last Dutch test. Dutch's dried urine hormone testing. It looks at sex hormones and stress hormones and how you break them down. And mine was like pretty much perfect. I was like, okay, that made me a little bit smug. But I was like, you know, given the amount of adaptogens I'm taking, given all the stuff I'm doing, it should be. You know, I'm constantly experimenting to see what works on me, but I can't necessarily always do that with other people because I'm not keeping such close observation as like looking at someone's urine patterns and things
yeah,
like that. So yeah, I definitely think that that, you know, if you are going to be bouncing back and forth between, for example, England to the US, back to Europe somewhere, it's less problematic than if you're going England, US, Asia.
Yeah.
So I think just these things need to be planned in a more effective way.
Yes, I do too. But people are learning. They're starting to learn, and hopefully,
But I think definitely people are becoming, oh, sorry, trying to get my drink but without knocking over my phone.
um, yeah, I think they're starting to learn, and people are much more. I think we've taken it for granted. So, I feel a bit grotty, and I have jet lag for a bit. And actually, now we're beginning to understand sort of biological, chemical impact it's having within us, and the mood it causes and changes. Artists have got enough going on with all of that, and then they have to deliver a really big show. And
Mm.
then, there's all the anxiety about the performance. It doesn't, no matter who is performing, everyone always says, yes, of course I get stressed. You can't possibly perform in front of people without stress.
No.
Um, so it's give them as best chance as possible, with the travel part and the time differences, into this performance. I do want to just say, you mentioned the other day when we were giving a talk to the government, your little trick of jumping in a Epsom salt bath as soon as you
Mm.
land. And that
Yeah.
really interests me. That, it's very cheap to do. Everyone can do it.
Yeah, well, you have to, if you're in a hotel, you basically have to ask for a room with a bath. My two hotel hacks are, I always pretend I'm diabetic and I need a fridge
Right.
so that I can go and buy juices from Whole Foods. And if I like before I stay anywhere, I always check what's in my neighborhood. And if there's no Whole Foods, I like if the Whole Foods is 20 minutes by cab, it's fine because sometimes they're far. Or a Trader Joe's, something where I know I can get things that I know that I need. And I always check if there's a CVS within walking distance or something like that. And if there isn't, I'll just take like 4 bags of Epsom salts in my suitcase, and it looks like I'm carrying cocaine. um, but yeah, like really scalding hot bath. Use an entire like massive bag of Epsom salts, and it really helps with jet lag. Like I promise. Every night though, I do it every night, and then it's for some reason. So I have all these little hacks. Plus, I take loads of glutathione. Um, I used to always look for somewhere I could go and get an IV, but time is just, doesn't really allow that to happen. Plus, it's often really expensive, and I don't know the quality of the IV vitamins they're using. I've become a bit OCD about that. So now I
Right.
just take like little cocktails of my own kind of high dose supplements and, loads of green juices, basically.
Right.
That's like, and I fast a lot when I travel. So I've been known to like go to America, have like an 8 hour delay and be doing a prolon. So by the time I get there, I want to kill someone because I'm so like hypo. But see, I wouldn't recommend that. But it's actually quite good for you to be fasting when you're traveling, because it really helps your body kind of understand like when you need to eat when you get to the other side. And also, just I use melatonin when I travel too. So in the run up, like at least a week before,
Yeah.
while you're there, and for about a week after, or if you're constantly traveling, just keep using it. But remember that melatonin doesn't put you to sleep. It just helps with kind of the circadian like
Yeah.
signaling. Hey, it's time you want to start winding down. So you have to use that with blue light blockers, the red light blockers as well. So I really like the True Dark brand because they do the blue light blockers, which you kind of should put on. Not yet, it's too light now, but in winter you should have had them on already. And
Yeah.
then they do these ones called Twilights, which are really good for planes as well, although I find it really tricky with all of this stuff when wearing contact lenses. And you put them on like an hour or two before bed, and even if you're watching something on a screen or you're reading the news, it doesn't really matter so much because your brain gets the signals that it's time for sleep. And
Right.
those really can improve sleep quality quite a lot. So if patients are using like an Aura ring or a Fitbit, and then you start looking at the deep sleep, although I don't know how accurate those things are, it's good to kind of understand how often someone's waking up. But when it comes to like the deep sleep kind of layering, it's not like, I don't think you're getting super accurate data, but it's good to at least understand, okay, where are the points in the night where you're struggling, and what basically that would help me to like understand what herbs would be most appropriate for that person in terms of like the sleep patterns and the sleep quality. So I think this is not the kind of stuff I suggest people do kind of on their own. I think you should probably seek herbal advice for that, because you can end up self-herbing and just not noticing anything beneficial and thinking that herbs are crap when they're really not. They're amazing.
Right.
And they're so much better than like sleeping pills. A lot of the sleeping pills that people are using, like the really strong Zopiclone and stuff like that, they really do increase your dementia risk. And
could you I've had a number of people that started to use a little bit of Xanax here and a little bit of Xanax there, and they are now seeking addiction clinic help. What is the long-term effect of using Xanax, apart from just getting addicted?
Dementia, like it increases your dementia risk. And the other thing that I found quite interesting from a trauma perspective is, I can't remember who told me this. It was definitely in a conference, like I've got the reference somewhere, but I think it's a John Hopkins study, but basically constant use of benzodiazepines encapsulates trauma, so you can't process it. And I found that very interesting, because a lot of people that we work with have a lot of trauma. And I think that not allowing yourself to get into that state of kind of REM sleep where you're able to subconsciously process things can really be quite detrimental long term for your mental health. But all of these things have an impact on our neurotransmitters that's not necessarily desirable. So rather than using Xanax, and I see a lot of people in clinic who are addicted to Xanax and Zopiclone, and those are the two main ones really. It's weird how many cancer patients are just given tons of Zop because their tamoxifen stopping them sleeping. I'm like, that doesn't. You're giving them Zopiclone and tamoxifen at the same time at night. I mean, think of the liver. So I'm really not like, I'm like, okay, and they're like, oh, but if you give me herbs, won't that interfere with my tamoxifen? I'm like, well, yes, but no, not if I'm using certain herbs. But like, hello, you're on like really strong medication. So yeah, it's about timing things properly. You can gently get people off benzos quite easily, but it takes some time. And just, I wouldn't do that if someone's in the middle of a really high pressure tour. I'd do that kind of before they went on tour.
It's just this sort of artificial, I will go to sleep, and it tends, there's someone I've been working with very recently who said, oh, it's really weird, I take loads and loads of Xanax now, and now I can't sleep at all. And it's like, yep.
Well, I mean, the other thing is, a lot of people who are using, and I remember, quite a few people do this, but they're using like uppers, and then they can't wind down, and then they have to take something strong to kind of shut their brain down. And that combined with the adrenaline that you're basically experiencing, like the kind of cortisol surges and adrenaline that you're getting from being on stage, that you need something to calm you down. So I would use like herbs like lavender, amazing, passion flower, California poppy. I mean, we have patients we can't give CBD because
of course,
it's kind of amazing that like there are all these amazing compounds that somehow have been, they've become, we can't use them with certain patients and clients. So there's loads of plant things, but ultimately it's not just about giving someone something to dampen down that like stress response and adrenaline and get people sleeping. It's about teaching people tools that will help them wind down, help their body get into a state of calm as well. And some of the great things that I use HeartMath. People say great things about the Sensate, but I'm not super convinced. And what was the other thing I really love? Like brainwave apps. So, and
Yeah,
I really love soundscapes and things. So, like, I
yeah,
love
there's some great things now.
jungle. I like the sound of the jungle and the chirping birds and sea, like big crashing waves and rain. That sort of white noise really helps me sleep if I'm away and I'm like feeling a bit like um but yeah, there's loads of tools, you know, meditation before bed, deep breathing. There's loads of things that help people. So it's not just about the kind of taking things orally and expecting miracles. It's actually about changing your habits and getting into a state of like good sleep hygiene, getting away from screens, not eating too late, not having alcohol at night because that really tanks your blood sugar and causes
Well, that's the other
liver
thing that
issues.
I wanted to speak to you about, because obviously we are providing rider boxes with all the nice little goodies to help varying kind of needs while you're away on tour. But it's you know, we've talked about cortisol running like crazy when you're performing, and that's a real stress hormone, isn't it? The kind
Yeah.
of, if you
So
were in the army, that's what you need to kind of get you through a war. But we're running that, which I understand. It's because obviously I have quite a few bipolar clients, and I'm led to believe that they're always kind of running that anyway because they're highly stressed, depending on what kind of mood they're in. That can have an impact on the heart, I think. Am I right?
sorry,
If
I
there's
disappeared
lots of
for a second
cortisol,
there.
you did. Cortisol is
Yeah.
particularly bad on the heart.
Yeah,
Now,
so cortisol can basically trigger a manic episode for sure. Like
right,
a significantly stressful experience can basically trigger mania. Um, but yeah, I mean, cortisol's doing lots of things. It's gonna increase your cardiovascular system, like stress, like increase your heart rate, increase your blood pressure. It will increase like blood sugar release, and then you end up storing that as fat around the middle because you often like end up releasing glycogen stores from the liver. It can affect like respiratory function. It thins your bones because ultimately cortisol kind of increases bone resorption. So there's lots of negatives. I mean, cortisol we do need because it is what helps us get, you know,
yes.
address like significant acute stresses. So yeah, I mean, it has a purpose. And the problem is we're living in a state of kind of chronic low grade cortisol activation, and that's the problem.
Right.
So I think the lifestyles we're living aren't really helping us. But that's the thing, you know, you can have a stressful life, but you can also increase your ability to handle it. And that's like basically the resilience that you need to build in order to handle and cope with stress.
Well, that's it. And I mean, you know, we've just seen Wimbledon. We've just seen the Euro football. I don't even know what it's called, but
Euro 2021.
and you know, you just see all of the kind of it's not just the team you see on the pitch. They've got, you know, their nutritionists, their behavioural psychologists, they've got the manager, all the different coaches, and you know, for the business that I have to work around and have worked in, you know, obviously I've seen it from the other side, from the just the business side, how there is nothing, there has been absolutely nothing to support musicians who are actually, it's like for me, you know, a concert where you might be singing for 2 hours, maybe longer, night after night with no real training. I mean, it's, you
Yeah.
know, if they say, oh, I bring someone who does massages before, everyone thinks that they're being kind of diva-ish and
Pampering themselves.
outrageous, and it's like, wow, there's, you know, there might be rehearsals to make sure that the band sound tight, but has the whole team had that time to really get their energy up and their strength? And you know, back in, I started working in the record business in the late 1980s, and you know, riders, I saw what went on those riders, and they include, and you know, I'm pretty sure I do know it still goes on. It's cocaine, it's bottles and bottles of whiskey,
Mm.
vodka, you know, and now it's like you look at it and you think, well, a lot of my clients are bipolar, autistic, Asperger's. They've got other body chemistries going on that's slightly different to general population.
Yeah.
If the crew, I'm not saying their actual crew, but if the business side, you know, the agents, the labels, and all these other people, where you have confused identity around the job they do, and you know, the sort of, oh, I'm at work, but I'm going to get drunk because I'm at a gig, but it's still my job. It's all very confusing.
But it seems it's like probably one of the only jobs where it's acceptable to like.
Well, it's kind of frowned at. I worked with an artist a couple of weeks ago, and he'd got himself into a bit of a pickle in a situation which involved getting very, 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 very drunk and high, which he now, you know, it's caused quite serious repercussions for him. But he said, "Oh, you just don't understand. I'm in a kind of a band, and that's the culture of, and that's like me. I've been around the business long enough to know that that's what you think it is."
Yeah.
And when I started to explain, you know, that we have people now looking at this as more scientific and more in the sports realm of how do we apply this, you could see the kind of, his face lit up. It's like, oh, actually, that's cool. I don't have to do this. But for me, it's like when you start to think, well, if they are bipolar or they are Asperger's or they are autistic and they've got slightly different chemistry going on, and even if they don't, once you hit the kind of, you know, cortisol, adrenaline, what other kind of hormones will be running?
Dopamine,
plus you add, you know, non-prescription drugs or sometimes prescription drugs plus alcohol. I mean, that's a lethal cocktail.
Absolutely.
And then you have to travel to the next show, and then you have to do your radio interviews, you know, and when I have press agencies that I work with, and they go, oh, can you get them to speak more nicely to journalists? And you look at what the tour's looking like, and it's like, well, no wonder they're in a bad mood. They're really messed up. So I think, you know, our kind of approach and applying it, even, you know, in a lot of bands don't use planes, they tour, they go on tour buses.
Yeah,
there's quite a lot of things that we've been looking at, haven't we, on what can we stick on that tour bus?
But also just the chronic pain and inflammation of like you know, not sleeping. I mean, some tour buses have amazing like sleeping facilities, but not all of them do. You know, just thinking about pain from sleeping in a funny position, or just pain and inflammation from not being well nourished and not eating what you need to eat to nourish yourself. And just like thinking about how you can tweak someone's catering, or, you know, give them some guidance around what to order in hotel rooms or when they're in a hotel restaurant, and then just like, you know, tools that you can use on a tour. So like biomats and things like that. Yeah, absolutely. It makes such a difference as well, because you can, like, no one's saying you can't do your touring. It's just a case of like, how do you do what you're meant to be doing, but also come out of it not feeling like you've just been hit by like 1,000 buses, and, you know, feeling productive and creative and ready for the next thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, because you'll get people going, we're about to go on tour, and you say, well, how are you touring? And they don't really get it. It's like, what are you talking about? And it's such an important thing to consider. You know, they're packing up costumes. They've got they've got everything else sorted, the lighting or whatever. They've got, particularly now with the LED screens are going in, and it's like, okay, well, what are we doing about health?
Well, yeah, where can you? Oh, there's like you know, there's always space for wellness tools. You know, that, you know, FSM, you know, frequency specific microcurrent, which is one of the modalities I do in my clinic. So we, you know, using a custom care or a precision care machine, and running frequencies, which help with kind of pain, inflammation, tissue healing, like cognitive function, stress, trauma. And like, you know, we've just managed to get hold of some machines that you connect to your phone. So effectively, it means that you can program that machine. I can like send a program to someone to use, and they just run it on themselves at night or during the day if they've got an injury. So there's loads of ways that we've kind of managed to make these tools more accessible and much more cost effective.
Yeah.
So you know, it doesn't always have to be expensive to just add a few little things into your rider or toolbox, metaphorical toolbox. But and all of these things have an impact on like kind of optimizing performance and recovery and mood. So I kind of feel like it's a bit of a no-brainer, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? You know, we've recently obviously been talking to a charity in America, and they've raised a lot of money to help with, you know, mind health. And I think obviously, you know, physical and mental health go hand in hand. And yet, you know, they kind of almost did it a little bit premature, because they hadn't really considered, well, what is the solution to this?
I mean, I always like I say this every time we talk to anyone. But like before you think about what you can bring in terms of like, hey, let's use supplements and herbs. You know, I say this so often now. I feel like if I have an epitaph, it will be this. You always have to start with assimilation. Like you cannot make neurotransmitters without protein, and if you know, you need to be able to absorb that protein. It makes no difference how much you're eating, because if you don't absorb it, then you're not going to make your neurotransmitters. You know, you need all of your vitamins. You need all of these kind of key nutrients, core nutrients. And of course, if you're not assimilating, then you know it doesn't really matter what you're taking if you can't absorb it. So like I always have to say, you know, regardless of how little someone is interested in food, just even basic things like telling people that they need to chew their food will make such a difference. And then just kind of, you know, the whole concept of like changing bad habits, and I mean that's definitely your expertise as a, you know, genius coach, because you have all your amazing techniques that are just so, you know, they work so efficiently because you know, the way you make them, people do them, is so unique, and it kind of becomes a very personal experience. So just kind of learning how to kind of move away from bad habits and make new ones, and listen to your body and kind of become more in tune with how you're feeling, and kind of embody emotions. And
well, and also, I mean, I do a lot of work around communicating that you're not happy and that things need to be changed. And you know, in this business, you have a lot of, particularly the new artists, you know, as you're getting bigger and bigger, you can make more demands, obviously, but the new ones that really are going out there, they're not making any money, it's purely for promotional purpose, it's relentless. You work so hard, but you're constantly being told, well, you know, or you feel like, I can't complain, I can't say anything because I'm meant to be really grateful for this. You know, and so being able to learn how to communicate, I am not happy. You know, I've had even like tour managers who will throw out the drug dealer that's turned up backstage, or the bad people that you just don't want around by the artists. It's like empowering people to speak up and say, no, or knowing when to end the evening as well.
Yes.
Because it's like, oh, another drink, stay a bit longer. Oh, the head of the label's coming. You've got to wait for them. You've got to wait for this person. Yes, of course, you've got to be really sensible, and you have to do your job, and we can learn these things together. But it's like there comes a point where it's like, you know what, my health comes way before anything else.
That's the same in any industry, Claire. I remember in banking, you know, I was a woman being dragged to strip clubs, and I couldn't say no, because then I would have, like, you know, it would have reflected badly. There's a lot of pressure to accept certain behaviors and not kick up a fuss, because otherwise you're like, you know, and I remember feeling a lot of pressure around that, and kind of ending up going to things and being around people I really don't want to be around. And it took me like a good 3 years to be able to say, you know what, I don't care if this has a negative impact on my career or anything. I'm not going to go.
Yeah, I do think now, I mean, if you're going to speak up, now is the time to speak up, because, you know, people are being held accountable for their bad behaviour at last. But it's still very difficult when you're in an industry where you're constantly made to feel like you're really lucky to be doing
Yeah.
this. And
And
anyone
you're
at any
expendable.
time is going to take your job from you. And it's like you've got, you know, a lot of the work I do is maintaining that self-belief, not in a kind of delusional way, because I have to deal with, or I have done, you know, self-sabotage, and that normally comes from lack of confidence. It's as long as you make it very clear what your outcomes are and your goals are, and they're in line with all your belief and value system, it should all run fairly smoothly. It's just unpicking and knowing what that is. And it just makes the whole communication process so much easier.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of industries where you're kind of made to feel expendable, and there's a lot of pressure to do things because, you know, there's always going to be someone else who's willing to accept crappy
Well,
conditions.
yeah, I mean, you know, when I was living in London, I lived very near a pub, and I would see, you know, everyone on a Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock come down from the office. They're all absolutely getting sloshed, and you're pretty sure that it was one of the kind of bosses that he's probably an alcoholic, and you know, he's trying to encourage everybody else to get completely smashed.
Yeah.
And actually, all they want to do is go home and be with their families or hang out with their friends. And it's reminding people, look, actually, they're a bit of a loser, and it's all right to say no.
I mean, there's a number of times where it's like I've just got to show my face. That expression is just,
Yeah, I mean, I was always very anti everything. So, no, I'm
yeah.
not that. So, I think I've been quite lucky just being, no, you have to accept me the way I am, and which is why a lot of people don't like me, and then the ones you know, and some people do. It's fine, but I think that's how you have to go through your life. You don't have to be nasty to them.
No,
But that
I definitely am also Marmite.
is fine. Um, and then, you know, so kind of this biology thing, because that really fascinates me with this, you know, the damage it can do. I notice a lot of musicians have terrible teeth, for example.
Yeah, that's usually because of like cocaine.
Yeah, well, I would have
Um,
guessed so, but I don't know whether you're secreting sort of, I don't know.
I would say, like, you know, that whole, it kind of comes down to stomach acid again. Like, I
Yeah.
see people with like much worse structural integrity of their enamel and their teeth if
Hmm.
they're basically not producing stomach acid, or, you know, not breaking down food. And also there's tons of like amazingly kind of dysbiotic bacteria that we can get in our mouth. um you know, we've got tests for this now, by the way. Like, our dear friends at Invivo do an oral microbiome test, and some of those bacteria have such far-reaching consequences, not just in like kind of gum erosion and cavity formation and periodontal disease, but like links with cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. It's
Hmm.
kind of like people don't think about the consequences of this. There's a few also that are linked with kind of the development of inflammatory bowel diseases like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's. So, you know, it's about understanding that it's not just about what's happening in your gut. Like, the digestive tract starts in your mouth. You have a mucosal epithelial, like, immune layer, which basically runs from mouth to, I hate the word anus. Mouth to anus. I think it's because of that film, the Human Centipede. Oh, I can't bear it. Um, that, and you've got like a whole respiratory immune system. You've got your genitourinary microbiome as well. So all of these areas are kind of exposed to like immune challenges,
Yeah,
particularly the respiratory tract with COVID, right? So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
what's in your mouth is really important. So we've got like, you know, that element of teeth, and also, I guess, you know, alcohol, people passing out, not brushing their teeth, and like loads of like erosion happening due to the sugar and bacteria. So, you know, loads of reasons why people don't have good teeth. I think the biggest things I see that like long-term consequences, because I do, you know, I know a lot of people in the music industry who you know, of varying ages as well. So, you know, I've seen a lot of suicides.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of prostate cancer primarily, a bit of pancreatic cancer, a little bit of lung cancer, breast cancer, loads of heart attacks and cardiovascular disease.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not talking even like the ages you would expect these. I'm talking like late 40s onwards.
Yeah.
You know, some even earlier. People have like had heart attacks and died like in their 30s.
Yeah.
You know, for me, you know, I don't know, like cocaine, for example. I did a post on this a while ago. I mean, it's not so long ago that you can't find it quite easily in my feed because I don't post that much. Um, but I did a post about drugs that people might take at the weekends and the impact they have on our bodies and our mitochondria. So like cocaine and speed are both drivers of mitochondrial fission. So that means that you're basically breaking your mitochondria. And that is basically the energy powerhouse in every single cell of your body. And for example, cancer is a disease of mitochondrial dysfunction. So if you're basically taking substances and being exposed to chemicals and toxins, whether it be drugs or smoking or chemicals in the air or metals like in our mouths or you know, chemicals from fixing cars, whatever it is, you're basically driving mitochondrial fission and you're increasing your risk of developing like DNA breaks that are going to potentially like end up causing cancer. And then when it comes to thinking about the suicides, you know, I do see a lot of people with like severe like dopamine and serotonin imbalances.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes you know it's brain chemistry. Some people have bipolar and they're not supported or diagnosed properly. But a lot of the time, it's like all of these things that have a massive impact on our neurotransmitter balance, and people can't handle it.
No. No, which is why, you know, I have obviously, you know, I make it very clear when I'm working with people, I have to have them sober when I'm working with them, because doing the kind of coaching work that I do, if they're not sober, it doesn't work. You know, and that's where, and I will help them to find sobriety in the right way for them. But there's nothing more depressing than you know, just seeing the impact it has on people, you know, in their 40s, in their 50s, and particularly if you've had a successful music career in your sort of 20s, early 30s, the money starts running out at the time when this really becomes a problem. You're not going to be well enough to go out and do a tour again.
I mean, that's been a driver for a lot of people's suicides.
Yeah.
You know, the notes basically often saying, I don't really want to have a life of, you know, poverty, basically. I'm going to go out now. And
Yeah, well,
that's,
it's very hard to go from, you know, you're on the telly. I mean, it's hard enough now where people have sold physical copies of records to streaming where you're earning virtually nothing.
but I saw
Um,
I saw a note in the Guardian, I think it was last night, that they're going to
yeah,
rejig.
still, yeah, but it's still virtually, it's a slightly bigger percentage of virtually nothing. So it's not, ultimately, it's, you know, it's a changing in business, but that's a whole nother topic. But it really is quite sad when you're trying to help people, you know, finally. I mean, it's great that they're actually going to get that help, but
I do work with people on substances, but I always make sure that they're getting support from a therapist at the same time, and that we're in an open and collaborative care like team, basically.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And you know, sometimes people have got themselves in such a pickle they have to medically, they've got a detox. It's
Yeah.
got to be done properly. Um,
Yeah.
but you know, it's, I just wish people, you know, they were taught this in schools. It's like this kind of debate whether, because so many people start smoking weed at such a young age, you know, sort of 12, 13,
Yeah.
and
And
what
it's
the
not, I
effect
mean,
it has on the amygdala and the development of the adult brain. You know, I was talking to a psychiatrist about whether that's the potential reason why we have this 27 club
well,
with
I would
artists, because
definitely,
the adult brain switches about 26, 27, doesn't it? Now,
yeah.
you know, I have worked with people who started to use drugs at about 13, who actually, whenever they get to a really big issue in their life or a big decision making, it's fight or flight. They just disappear, and they don't seem to have developed, and they won't have developed the kind of onboard kind of memory bank that the adult brain needs to develop to actually, to challenge things and face things. And I do wish, in schools, instead of saying don't take drugs, sure, take drugs, but this is the consequence of what happens to you.
Yeah, this is the thing. It's like you can give people this overriding message about why things are bad, but unless you explain it, then where's the motivation to not do them?
That's right. I mean, they've got no interest whatsoever in explaining the long-term effects of alcohol because it's such a big business. And
I mean, even things like smoking, I'm going to go into smoking now, but like if people knew, actually, yeah, we all know about the lung impact, but no one says things like it has an impact on your gut, it can affect your absorption of nutrients, it wipes out zinc, so you must, maybe want to think about supplementing with this. Just kind of, and also if people are wanting to stop having, habits like smoking, just how do you, it's a bit like kind of coming off antidepressants. You have to replete certain nutrients before someone will be able to do that in a way that is kind of healthy and doesn't kind of cause a negative impact. So it's actually, I don't judge anyone who's on anything or taking something.
No, I don't.
Has a habit, but at the same time, I like to just educate them in a kind of as kind a way as I can, so that we can kind of then think about it. Are they still wanting to do that? And then maybe...
Exactly. But I do think it's, while we're having biology lessons at school, I remember being forced to cut a frog into pieces and dissect a bull's eye. I think it would have made more sense to explain, when you are under stress, these are the hormones that you are running, and this in the long term can cause this. It could have made me go and get therapy when I was stuck in the tsunami, as you know, and it's like I had no idea that the chemistry that would have changed in my body during that period. And you go on, I can manage it, I can cope. But in a biology lesson at school, you're taught all of these things, including you drink this much per day, this can happen over time, and if you were taking these drugs, this is what may happen with your brain development. I know it's still work in progress, and we know more, it would seem, about going to space than we do really about the brain. We're still, I
don't know, you've got these kind of tools who have loads of money just wanting to go to space.
Yeah, don't get me on that, because I was furious last weekend. And then there's this other, I want to talk a little bit about, in the way that we've been helping artists with, meal planning or little rituals that they can do just to kind of remind themselves of how to relax, how to calm down. I think you've described a lot of that already. And the latest kind of tech tools, I mean, it is a bit much. Sometimes I look at my app, the app store, and it's like relax, and it's thousands and thousands, and then you go, oh, this looks interesting, and it's subscribed for this.
That's why we curate the best things for that person, and everything is generally personalized. But we're not just thinking about the artist, we're thinking about everyone in the team, and their own individual needs. And like me, I love everything to be as personalized as possible. Sometimes budget won't allow that to happen, and that's fine, but then we just keep things really core. But obviously my biggest priorities with kind of personalizing things are making sure that if someone is on medications, and a lot of people are, that we're being very cautious around any sort of potential interaction. So it's about just kind of, ultimately the goal with what we're doing is to try and make people feel good and basically increase longevity in a career and performance and optimizing like everything. I mean, ultimately it's about career longevity, right? But healthy career longevity.
Sustainable careers, yeah, completely, because there's so there is so much money invested into talent, all sorts of talent. I mean, this is where I get very angry, because you have these new shows now, like Love Island, who are trying to create personalities very quickly. And I think they're now obliged to give them 8 therapy sessions, which is worth nothing. That's about £1,000 per person. Isn't it 2 or 3 suicides have come from that show?
I don't know, because I don't have a TV
Well,
license.
I don't watch it because I'd rather stab myself
I'd
than
rather eat
watch
wasps
this
with
program.
a razor.
But it just amazes me that life is worth so little, and actually this is short term, you know, make them famous, don't really care about, oh, they've killed themselves. It's actually just got the program back into the TV again.
Yeah.
But the people I work with, you know, I want to know, they've probably learned how to produce for years. They've learned how to play instruments for years. They've spent a lot of time and effort getting really, really good at what they do. It costs a fortune to actually invest in it, and yet this health element hasn't been really addressed properly.
Yeah.
And obviously I've raised a lot of, you know, I've done loads of public speaking about mental health and music and what should be being done. But actually still they're resistant to, okay, well, now we have to apply. I think they don't know, actually, and obviously we're doing our bit. But
Yeah.
but you see it in television, they just don't care at all. It's you know, someone once said to me in a record company, which was deeply cynical, an artist's catalogue is worth so much more when they're dead. And it's a little bit like painters.
Yeah.
You know, you have a suicide of an artist and suddenly they have all of their albums go in the top 10 immediately. The label are making an absolute fortune. And you know, it's not just the music business that's like that. But for me, it is, if you have invested at an early stage of an artist's life, they can be earning, they can be doing well into their sort of, you know, 70s, 80s, still performing, still making lots of money.
Yeah, I mean, so like, you know, we've talked about some of the bigger artists from many years ago who may have been wild in their youth, but you know, they're certainly not wild now.
No, I mean, Elton John, I think, is probably one of the best examples of that. Who's still going? Who's got his? Is it the final tour next year? I'm not sure, but
Supposed to be, but
you know, to have got away with what he did, considering what he'd done to his body, it's a miracle, really. But so it shows how resilient the body actually is. But you know, I just think, I remember when rugby players were absolutely enormous and they'd be drinking beer and kind of smoking, and now they're like, there's such great athletes, and it's like, yeah, it's time we start applying this into all of the entertainment industry, I think.
yes, we do. We are working on it.
We are, and I think we've done our.
We have. So yeah, I think we've talked about lots of different things. We've talked about travel and circadian rhythm and sleep deprivation and food and anxiety and like winding down after a gig, and we've talked about like immune support. We've covered loads. We talked about looking after artists. We talked about our wellness riders. Yeah, it's been a good hour.
It has been a good hour, and if anyone has watched this who wants to know more information, what's your Anthro Botanica?
I'm at I'm at Anthro Botanica at info@anthrobotanica, and also carolinabrooks.com. It goes to that website, and Your Green Room is how we do our stuff. So it's, what's the website? What's the email for that? Claire at yourgreenroom.org, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the one. And it's Claire without an I.
Claire without an I. Which is weird because you're French technically.
I am, but my mother loved Claire in Suffolk, and that is why my name is spelt the way it is.
I'm named after Princess Caroline of Monaco because my dad fancied her.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so yeah, we'll be doing our next one next month. We'll see. We're gonna have a surprise for that one.
Oh yeah, we are. Which we can't spoil.
Which we can't spoil yet, but it'll be exciting.
Good. Well, thank you so much.